The slow, heavy green water of the broad river slipped quietly past the massive oak piles of the wooden bridge, working its way around the dark timbers with a soft and endless sound. A low, pale mist lay unbroken over the wide water meadows, breathing a cool and fragrant dampness into the mild night air of the valley. Out on the quiet current, the small yellow flame of an oil lamp leaned gently in the invisible breeze, burning steady and sweet in the damp at the stern of a moored river barge. The thick, tarred hemp ropes slung from the timber cleats dipped heavily into the black water, tight with the river's slow pull, lifting a little as the long hull eased back against the mooring. Beyond the edge of the water, the shapes of the shuttered warehouses stood entirely quiet in the darkness, smelling faintly of old wood, pitched timber, and spilled grain. The wet paving stones of the quays sloped down to the muddy bank, catching the faint reflection of the stars through the drifting summer clouds. Up on the gentle hill of the left bank, the straight gravelled streets of the stone town lay completely asleep, resting deeply under the immense silence of the Gaulish sky. There was no hurry anywhere in the valley, only the steady, sliding weight of the river pouring smoothly down toward the sea, carrying the little town and the warm night softly on its back into the deep shadows under the overhanging willows. The deep heat of the late summer day had long since lifted from the stone and timber of the wharves, leaving behind only a gentle warmth that radiated slowly out into the gathering mist. The heavy, flat-bottomed river barges of the Boatmen's Guild lay moored in long, quiet rows against the banks, their tall, bare masts unstepped and resting across the broad wooden decks. The day's cargo had all been lifted away, carried off to the deep storehouses by men whose shoulders still remembered the rolling weight of the wine casks and the heavy clay amphorae. The rich, sweet smells of spilled olive oil, dried wheat, and rough Gaulish beer lingered in the cool air, sinking down to mix with the scent of river mud and crushed water mint. The tallymaster's wooden wax tablet lay shut and tied away in the dark, the sharp scratches of the stylus recording the quiet wealth of the river trade, safe now behind heavy, iron-bound doors. Up on the wide decks of the moored barges, the broad-shouldered boatmen were already rolled deep in their heavy woolen cloaks, sleeping warmly out under the open sky. The wide oak hulls of their flat vessels eased back and forth on the gentle current, knocking very softly against the leather fenders and the thick mooring posts. It was the slow rocking they had known since they were born, pulling them down into a dreamless and perfectly secure rest. Out in the middle of the slow green river, the water split gently around the low prow of the island, parting like dark, heavy silk over a submerged stone. This was the oldest, deepest heart of Lutetia, the first settlement of the Parisii, standing quiet and solid in the constant embrace of the moving water. The close-set clusters of timber and stone houses on the island had their heavy wooden shutters firmly closed against the damp, their slanting, tiled roofs washed pale by the faint starlight. The water curled endlessly around the muddy verges of the land, licking at the trailing roots of the willow trees that leaned out heavily over the deep channel. There was almost no sound here, except the small, tireless working of the current against the edges of the earth, a soft, liquid whispering that had gone on for thousands of years. The green water was smooth and heavy, sliding past the stone walls and the wooden slips with a dark and glossy perfection. It carried the faint, broken reflections of the few lamps still burning on the banks, long golden smears that wavered and reformed as the heavy water moved on. The people sleeping in the warm houses on the island breathed in time with the deep, slow pulse of the river, their resting minds anchored safely to the heavy, moving water. Reaching out from the sleeping island, two long timber bridges stretched their heavy wooden backs across the water to join the banks, one to the left bank and one to the right. They were built on massive oak piles, driven deep into the riverbed by the generations of boatmen, standing firm and unmoving against the steady, heavy push of the river. The dark water swirled quietly around the thick wooden piers, creating small, quiet eddies that spun for a moment and then smoothed away into the black night. Up on the high span of the bridges, the wide wooden planks were already pale and slick with the gathering dew, reflecting the faintest glimmer of the clouded night sky. The whole structure creaked softly to itself from time to time, thick timber adjusting its great weight over the moving water. The mist that was rising off the flat water meadows drifted freely between the heavy piles, curling like cool white smoke through the dark gaps in the woodwork. It thickened and thinned with the invisible breaths of the night air, sometimes obscuring the far bank entirely, leaving the bridges to look as though they led out into a quiet white nothingness. A solitary mooring rope, tied off to one of the thick bridge supports, hung down into the water, its tarred fibers dark and heavy with the damp, dripping soft and slow, each drop making a tiny ring that spread and vanished. Up on the gentle slope of the left bank, the main streets of the Roman town climbed quietly away from the water, laid out in straight, neat lines over the hill. The gravelled surface of the long main road, the Cardo, was wet with the evening damp, its pale stones silent and empty under the sky. The workshops and the merchant stalls that lined the road were tightly shuttered, their tiled eaves dripping very slowly into the stone gutters. Higher up on the hill, the great dark bulk of the Forum and its long basilica stood enormous and still, a mountain of Roman stone sleeping above the rooftops. The vast public baths built by the wealthy boatmen's guild lay utterly silent, their heavy doors closed against the night. Down in the vaulted cellars, the great hypercaust furnaces had long been banked, a deep bed of red embers breathing softly under a thick blanket of white ash, the raised floors above them cooling slowly through the dark. The scent of cold stone, old steam and dry wood smoke hung heavy in the damp air. Over on the eastern edge of the town, the tiered stone seats of the arena curved in an empty bowl, pale under the passing clouds, where the crowd had sat that afternoon to watch a play or a contest. Grass and heavy dew gathered undisturbed on the wide stone steps, waiting in the deep quiet for the morning sun. Down near the water, in the very heart of the sleeping town, where the Cardo met the cross street, a great carved stone pillar stood tall in the quiet shadows, raised long ago by the proud guild of the river boatmen, the Parisii, when the town was younger and the guild already rich. Here, cut deep into the fine white Gaulish limestone, the great Roman Jupiter stood, bearded and grave, lord of thunder and of order. And beside him Vulcan with his hammer, and the twin horsemen Castor and Pollux, and Fortuna with her steering rudder and her horn of plenty. But the pillar held older gods too, holy here long before the first Roman sandal touched the riverbank. Cernunnos sat among them, the antlered lord, his horns spreading like the branches of an oak, a heavy torque in one hand, a horned serpent coiled quiet at his side. He was not strange here and not frightening, no figure of dark woods and dread, but calm as a tree in summer, and the stone beasts carved around him lay in peace, as if no fear had ever lived in the world. Sitting quietly on a mooring block near the foot of the pillar, an old bargeman was still awake, a heavy woollen cloak pulled tight around his shoulders, staring out over the dark water. He was murmuring softly to himself in the drifting mist, the low, worn gravel of his voice carrying just a little way along the damp stones, an old story he had heard from his grandfather, who had heard it from his, back and back into the green dark before the town of stone. As the old boatman spoke, the quiet streets of Lutetia seemed to dissolve at the edges, and the night widened out into the deep, breathing expanse of the ancient summer forest. The story moved deep into the old green world, into the warm, living heart of the immense woods that had once come right down to the water's edge, where the fields and the quays now lay. This was a forest of unimaginable age and depth, a place of huge, silent oak trees and towering ashes whose uppermost leaves brushed the passing clouds. The air in the deep wood was heavy and sweet, carrying the rich, damp smell of warm leaf mould, crushed bracken, and the rough, dry scent of old oak bark. Even in the dusk, the light under the great canopy filtered down in shafts of pure, soft gold and deep green, turning the air warm, filling the spaces between the boles with a soft radiance that seemed to breathe. The soft floor of the forest was thickly carpeted with bright, springy moss, deep enough to swallow the sound of any footfall entirely. Giant ferns uncurled in the gentle shadows, hiding the small secret paths made by the wild things over hundreds of undisturbed years. The forest was not silent, but full of small, gentle sounds, each one part of the same slow breathing. A twig easing under a soft hoof, a beetle turning in the moss, water dripping from one leaf to a leaf below, the stir of a bird resettling in its nest. As the evening drew on, the whole immense forest seemed to exhale, a long, soft breath of cooling air that rustled the millions of leaves just once, before settling down into a profound and absolute green peace. In the very center of this living wood, in a wide, still clearing where the moss grew thickest and the light fell fullest, sat Cernunnos, the antlered lord of the beasts. He sat completely still, cross-legged upon the warm earth, calm as a great oak, his crown of heavy antlers branching up toward the shifting leaves like the forest itself. In one quiet hand, he held a heavy, twisted torque of gold that caught the last slant of the evening light, and beside him, coiled peacefully in the green ferns, rested a great ram-horned serpent, its scales the color of fallen leaves. its eyes half closed in the warmth of the god's presence. All around the horned lord, the beasts of the wild wood had gathered to rest, entirely empty of all fear. A huge red stag, with a great crown of bone, lay quietly in the tall grass, its breath coming slow and even, while the gentle does and their spotted fawns were folded down softly in the bracken nearby. A massive wild ox stood in the deep shade, slowly chewing the cud, and a wild boar lay fast asleep in a dry earth wallow, its thick bristles perfectly still. And among the roots, a she-wolf lay with her muzzle on her paws, her yellow eyes calm, resting an arm's length from the folded fawns, as though she had forgotten what hunger was. In the presence of the antlered god, the long hunt was suspended. The old fear between the hunter and the hunted dissolved like mist in the morning sun, and the whole wild world lay down together in absolute, unspoken trust. From the quiet open hands of the horned god flowed all the immense plenty of the turning year, the rich fatness of the world that kept the forest people safe and warm. He was the secret, silent keeper of the heavy acorns that dropped into the deep leaf mold to fatten the wild pigs before the long winter came. He was the gentle lord of the wild apples and the dark, sweet berries that grew thick on the briars, and of the sudden, miraculous sprouting of the first green grain in the cleared earth. The silver fish that swam thick and heavy in the deep pools of the river belonged to his keeping, as did the bees that made their honey in the hollow trees, and the deep fatness of the herds that grazed quietly in the water-meadows. The Parisii, the people of the river and the dark woods, had always known that their very lives rested on the calm generosity of this green lord. They had thanked him with quiet words in the twilight, pouring a little wine into the moss, leaving small, respectful gifts, and hanging bright talks at the roots and the low branches of the greatest trees, for a full harvest and a safe year. Even now, in a neat world of straight roads and Roman stone, that old gratitude was still there, running like a deep, unseen spring beneath the foundations of the town. The wealth of Lutetia, the heavy river barges laden with grain and dark wine, was only the newest face of the old green plenty. The same grain, the same fish, the same giving earth. And now the thanks were spoken in Roman words and Gaulish words together, and neither was wrong. As the told story deepened, the low gold light in the forest clearing finally faded away, gently replaced by the soft, rich blue of the gathering night. The antlered god remained perfectly still in the shadows, a solid, deeply comforting shape in the dark, watching over the sleeping beasts. The underground spring beneath the massive roots of the great oak ran clear and cold, a tiny silver sound of water falling slowly over stone, filling a small pool where a mouse came down to drink, unafraid, its whiskers trembling in the last of the light. The wild bees that had worked the high white blossoms all day had long since drifted home to their hollowed tree, hiving together in a warm, humming mass of golden honey and wax, their low note dropping slowly into silence. The evening wind died down completely, leaving the branches of the ancient trees utterly motionless against the starlit Gaulish sky. The red stag and the great ox and the boar and the wolf slept deeply, their warm sides rising and falling in unison with the slow, deep breathing of the forest itself. The night deepened, soft and absolute, laying a heavy blanket of dark peace over the leaves, the earth, and the quiet, cross-legged lord who kept the watch, resting gently in the long, slow turn of the fruitful seasons. The old tale, murmured by the dark water, slowly ebbed away into the mist, and the green calm of the ancient forest flowed straight back down into the sleeping streets of Lutetia. Up in the quiet, empty heart of the town, the very same horned god sat carved upon the stone pillar of the boatman, still keeping his quiet watch over the children of the forest people. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the Roman Jupiter, their old religions rhyming quietly in the damp night air. The same people honoring both. The tired boatmen asleep under their heavy woolen cloaks on the moored barges were the true descendants of those who had first thanked the antlered lord for the acorns and the deer. The broad green river that carried their heavy cargoes of southern wine and fine red pottery was the very same water that had run through the deep roots of the ancient wood. The stone town and the green world were not opposed, but seamlessly woven together in the slow, unhurried fabric of the summer night. Antler and column, leaf and tile, the old thanks and the new. Even now, past the last lamplit house, the great woods still stood, just beyond the ploughed fields, dark and breathing, ringing the little town with the living memory of the deep forest. Down at the very edge of the river, where the muddy bank met the sliding water, a single figure knelt quietly in the dark, performing a custom far older than any town of stone. A small, dull bronze coin was turned over slowly between calloused fingers, feeling the worn face of an emperor, smoothed almost blank by many years of handling. With a gentle flick of the thumb, the coin was let fall into the moving river, catching the faintest glint of starlight before it touched the black surface. The tiny, hollow sound of the water taking the metal was swallowed instantly by the vast, quiet murmuring of the heavy current. Small, perfect ripples went out in widening circles from the point where it fell, stretching and smoothing away completely as they were carried downstream. It was a simple, everyday gift to the river goddess, a quiet asking for kindness, for safe passage on the water and the grace of the deep springs. A brooch might follow another night, or a bent pin, or a tiny figure of a god. Small things, ordinary things, given with a quiet word or no word at all. The river took the offering down into its cold, secret depths, laying it beside 1,000 other bent pins and brooches and coins given by 100 generations of hands. The simple reverence for the water was as natural here as breathing, a quiet nod to the unseen powers that held the town and the river and the green world together. Very few souls were left awake in Lutetia to hear the deep, slow turning of the night. A night watchman walked with heavy, measured steps along a wet, gravelled street, the small, oily sweet flame of his little clay lamp swinging back and forth, pushing the long shadows up against the painted plaster walls. Down by the dark water, the keeper of a timber yard tried the heavy iron ring of an oak door and found it fast. The smell of fresh-cut oak and pitch still hanging in the boatyard behind him. Over on the edge of the island, a tired ferryman lay fast asleep in the bottom of his small wooden skiff, the boat rocking gently as it swung easily on its tether. In the low, vaulted room of a bakery, The fire had been carefully banked with ash for the morning, its dull red glow offering a last fading warmth to the heavy brick ovens, the smell of warm bread still in the walls. A thin, stray cat walked lightly along the top of a stone garden wall, completely silent, melting away instantly into the thick ivy. Far off, across the broad expanse of the water-meadows, a farm dog gave a single muffled bark, answered a long moment later by another dog on the far side of the river. By the tall stone pillar, the old bargeman had finished his murmuring, the last words of the story falling so low they seemed part of the current. Cernunnos, the Green Lord, the keeper, and he pulled his cloak a little tighter against the mist, finding his own sleep by the edge of the smooth, dark water. Beyond the last guttering lamps of the little town, the wide, fruitful country of the Parisii lay stretched out under the mild, Gaulish sky. The hedged fields and the sloping vineyards lay heavy with the late summer growth, resting after the long baking heat of the day. The apple and pear orchards stood in dark, ordered rows, the fruit still hard and green on the low branches, waiting for the harvest the turning year would surely bring. The deep smell of cut hay and rich, damp earth drifted slowly across the open land, carrying the essence of the Gaulish summer right into the stone streets of Lutetia. A little fine, warm rain began to fall softly from the high clouds, touching the leaves and the grass with a barely audible whisper, washing the fine dust from the heavy green vines and passing off again as gently as it had come. And beyond the fields and the resting farms, rising up on the gentle hills to the south and the east that cupped the river valley, stood the great old woods. They were a solid wall of soft blackness against the night sky, breathing slowly and endlessly in the dark, holding the little lamplit town securely in the very middle of their ancient green world. A quiet ring of protective shadow that kept the haste of the empire far away. The night moved on, slow and seamless, drawing a deeper blanket of mist over the slow green river and the wide water meadows. The banks of pale white fog thickened and spread, blurring the drooping willow trees and the heavy wooden bridge piles into soft, ghostly shapes that had no hard edges anywhere, haloing every last lamp with a ring of gold. Every flat-bottomed barge rested still on the smooth water, the long oak hulls sleeping at their moorings, the current moving them only enough to keep the mooring lines soft and living, easing and returning, easing and returning. The island and the neat stone town on the hill were both surrendered to the dark, wrapped in the calm of the deep summer night. In the dark heart of the town, the boatman's pillar stood quiet, Jupiter and Cernunnos together, Roman and Gaulish, stone and green, watching over the same sleeping people. The ancient woods breathed out their cool, damp air on the hills, bringing the smell of oak and fern right down to the water. The small oil lamps that had burned on the sterns of the boats and in the quiet niches of the shrines began to gutter low, their flames shrinking down to tiny blue beads before winking out entirely. The slow, endless sliding of the river carried the last of the light away toward the sea, and the dark was soft, and the dark was warm, and the night held the town, and the green world held the night, and everything rested, and everything breathed, and the voice sank toward silence, without saying goodbye.